Let us be frank, for the romanticism that swathes the history of popular music serves primarily to obscure the truth. History, in its most vital and instructive form, is not a grand procession of coronations. It is not forged in the blinding flash of stadium spotlights. Nor is it consecrated on the stages of those legendary festivals that have been eulogized to the point of cultural exhaustion. The mythology of Woodstock, of Monterey, of the Isle of Wight, is a comfortable fiction, a highlight reel that conceals the immense, tedious, and often agonizing labor of artistic becoming. The real work, the grit and substance of genuine evolution, happens elsewhere. It unfolds in the strange, forgotten corners of the world, on provincial festival stages, in half-empty university halls, and in cavernous, echoing theaters where the audience is a baffling cocktail of the devoted, the curious, the hostile, and the utterly indifferent. It is in these unglamorous crucibles, far from the suffocating weight of expectation, that a band truly discovers what it is made of, or, perhaps more pointedly, what it is not. If one truly wishes to understand the monumental, world-straddling entity that Pink Floyd would become, the architects of a sound and vision that would define the grandest, most melancholic ambitions of 20th century music, one would be profoundly mistaken to look only to the Nebworths, the Hyde Parks, or the shimmering diamond-like perfection of their later globe-conquering tours. No. To find the embryonic heartbeat of that Leviathan, you must travel back to a more ambiguous, more uncertain, and infinitely more interesting time. You must go to a place of almost ludicrous incongruity, to a sun-drenched playground for the international jet set on the French Riviera. You must go to Saint-Tropez on a sweltering evening in August of 1970. One must first steep oneself in the sheer, glorious absurdity of the setting. Saint-Tropez in 1970 was not a bastion of the counterculture. It was its gilded antithesis. This was the very epicenter of a particular kind of post-war European hedonism, a fishing village made mythic by the pouting lips and untamed spirit of Brigitte Bardot in And God Created Woman, and subsequently colonized by the forces she had unwittingly unleashed. It had become the summer capital of the international jet set, a sun-bleached haven for Greek shipping magnates, German industrialists, aging American playboys, and a legion of glistening, perpetually bronzed women for whom the word psychedelic described a pattern on a Pucci scarf, not a state of consciousness. This was a town of old money and new vulgarity, of Riva yachts bobbing in the harbor like polished beetles, their chrome winking in the unforgiving sun. It was a place where champagne flowed with the thoughtless abundance of tap water, where the most pressing concerns were the reservation at Club 55 and the angle of one's tan. It was, in short, a society of exquisite surfaces, of physical beauty prized above all else, of lazy, sensual pleasure pursued with an almost religious devotion. Into this manicured garden of earthly delights came four Englishmen who were, at their very core, the living refutation of everything Saint-Tropez stood for. Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason were not hedonists. They were not beautiful, peacocking idols. They were cerebral, often morose, determinedly middle-class men who had stumbled out of architectural studies and into the chaotic, lysergic slipstream of the London underground scene. Their stock in trade was not the infectious 3-minute pop song engineered for dancing on the beach. It was the long-form instrumental, the sonic exploration of inner space, the musical manifestation of alienation, paranoia, and a uniquely English strain of pastoral melancholy. To plant Pink Floyd on a festival stage in Saint-Tropez was a cultural juxtaposition of the highest order, a gesture of such profound artistic dissonance that it bordered on the surreal. It was like asking a brutalist architect to design a beach umbrella, or commissioning Samuel Beckett to write the dialogue for a seaside postcard. By any logical measure, it ought to have been an unmitigated disaster, a cringeworthy footnote in the annals of poor concert booking. And yet, it is precisely in this jarring collision of worlds that we find a moment of startling clarity, a high-resolution snapshot of a great band at its most pivotal and uncertain crossroads, poised between the psychedelic whimsy of its past and the immense, terrifying gravity of its future. To truly comprehend the significance of this performance, one must first understand the wilderness in which the band found itself in the year 1970. The incandescent, erratic, and ultimately tragic genius of their founder, Syd Barrett, was no longer a guiding star, but a ghost that haunted their every chord and every decision. His departure 2 years prior, a slow, painful slide into mental illness exacerbated by prodigious drug use, had left a vacuum that was both creative and psychological. They were liberated from his increasingly unpredictable behavior, but they were also profoundly untethered from the strange, childlike vision that had made them the darlings of the UFO Club and the architects of the British psychedelic sound. What remained in his wake was a four-headed beast, a collective of formidable talents pulling in fundamentally different directions. In Roger Waters, the bassist and increasingly dominant lyricist, a formidable caustic intellect was beginning to stir. His was a mind that saw music not as a mere sequence of pleasing sounds, but as a theatrical medium, a vehicle for grand, often cynical, conceptual statements about madness, mortality, society, and the lingering trauma of war, a theme rooted in the loss of his own father in the Second World War. In David Gilmour, the guitarist and reluctant singer who had been brought in to cover for and then replace Barrett, the band had found a crucial anchor. Gilmour possessed an innate, almost classical sense of melody and an exquisite sonic taste, a voice of lyrical, blues-inflected reason that could counterbalance the group's more esoteric tendencies. His guitar playing was not about flashy pyrotechnics. It was about texture, emotion, and the perfect placement of a single soaring note. He was the band's soul, just as Waters was becoming its mind. Then there was Richard Wright, whose keyboards were the band's textural heart, painting vast, impressionistic landscapes of sound with his Hammond and Farfisa organs. He was the architect of their atmosphere, the man who gave their music its sense of scale, space, and spectral beauty. And finally, behind the kit was Nick Mason, the band's steadfast anchor and its architectural conscience. His drumming was rarely flashy, but it was intelligent, structured, and deeply attuned to the dynamics of the music, less about primal fury and more about the patient, deliberate building and release of tension. The two albums that immediately preceded this moment, the soundtrack for Barbet Schroeder's film More, 1969, and the sprawling double album Ummagumma, 1969, were the sound of this four-way tug-of-war made manifest. More was a collection of disparate cues, a fascinating hodgepodge of delicate acoustic ballads and heavy, experimental mood pieces. It was a functional, professional piece of work, but it lacked a coherent identity. Ummagumma was a far more telling document. One half was a powerful, if slightly raw, documentation of their formidable live prowess, capturing the energy of their extended jams. The other half was a deeply, almost painfully self-indulgent exercise, a solo project for each member, affording them half a side of vinyl to do with as they pleased. It was a declaration of fierce individualism that proved, if anything, that they were far stronger together than they ever could be apart. Waters offered up a folk and tape collage experiment, Gilmour a multi-tracked guitar piece, Wright a classically influenced keyboard suite, and Mason a percussive experiment in musique concrète. It was the sound of a band taking a thorough inventory of its constituent parts before it could hope to reassemble them into a new, more powerful, and unified whole. By 1970, they were hardened road warriors, slogging through an endless and punishing series of European dates. They played to massive counterculture gatherings like the Bath Festival of Blues and Progressive Music, and the Kralingen and Pop Festival in the Netherlands, sharing bills with the titans of the era. They also played to university students, to crowds at political rallies like the Fête de l'Humanité in Paris, and in grand old opera houses. The Saint-Tropez gig, part of the Festival de Musique de Saint-Tropez, was different. This was not a pilgrimage site for the faithful hordes of progressive rock. This was an interruption, a strange and challenging artistic intrusion into a hermetically sealed world of leisure and luxury. This was not their audience. The music they chose to bring to this seaside town was the sound of their internal struggle made external. The centerpiece of their set, and indeed of their entire creative output at the time, was a sprawling, multi-part, quasi-symphonic suite they had been laboriously developing and refining in live performance for the better part of a year. For a time, it bore the wonderfully ridiculous working title, The Amazing Pudding, a name that perfectly captured its lumpy, experimental, and not yet fully cooked nature. It was ambitious, unwieldy, and utterly defiant of categorization. By the time they reached the French Riviera, it was on the cusp of being christened with the famously opaque title it would carry on the album of the same name, Atom Heart Mother. The story, which has the ring of truth in its sheer banality, is that the name was plucked at random by Waters and Ron Geeson, the avant-garde composer who would help orchestrate the studio version, from an Evening Standard newspaper headline about a 56-year-old woman fitted with a nuclear-powered pacemaker. This choice was, in itself, a statement. In an era of cosmic, portentous song titles, they chose something pointedly mundane, a detail that speaks volumes about the band's deliberate, almost perverse rejection of the psychedelic profundity that was still expected of them. They were actively trying to be uncool, to distance themselves from the flower power cliches they had helped to create. This, then, was the formidable weapon they chose to unleash upon the unsuspecting jet set of Saint-Tropez. It is crucial to understand that the version of Atom Heart Mother performed that night was not the polished, brass and choir-laden epic that would appear on the record just 2 months later. Without the orchestra and choir arranged by Geeson, the piece was stripped bare to its skeletal essence, revealing a rawer, leaner, and altogether more aggressive beast. It was a pure showcase for the four of them as musicians, a challenging, dynamic journey that shifted restlessly between its distinct movements. The piece would have opened with Gilmour's now famous main theme, a soaring, majestic guitar line that possesses the grandeur of an Ennio Morricone film score, echoing across the bay, not with the support of French horns, but in a stark dialogue with Wright's atmospheric organ. The audience would have been led through percussive, experimental passages, through dissonant cello-like slides from Gilmour's guitar, and into serene, melodic interludes that offered moments of deceptive calm before the next sonic shift. This was not background music. It was demanding architectural sound that required focus and concentration. It was a sonic siege laid against the comfortable, self-satisfied chatter of the evening. Imagine the scene. As the Mediterranean sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, elegant shadows across the pristine plaza, the air filled not with breezy pop, cocktail jazz, or the latest disco tune from Paris, but with these vast, often difficult, and deeply unconventional musical structures. The remainder of the set list that evening served as a guided tour through the band's fractured but fascinating identity. They would have almost certainly performed Astronomy Domini, a relic from the Barrett era, a piece of pure, frantic, interstellar rock and roll. To hear its frantic, descending riff and lyrics about the moons of Jupiter echoing across that tranquil, moneyed harbor must have sounded utterly alien, a broadcast from another, far more chaotic universe. Playing this song every night was a complex act for the band. It was simultaneously an homage to their lost leader, an exorcism of his ghost, and a confrontation with their own past. For Gilmour in particular, it meant stepping into Barrett's shoes, singing his words and interpreting his guitar parts, but doing so with his own smoother, more controlled style. A subtle but significant act of reappropriation. Then inevitably they delved into the deep, hypnotic, and ominous pulse of Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. This track, more than any other, was the bridge between their psychedelic origins and their future ambient explorations. It was a masterclass in tension, built not on melody but on texture and repetition. Wright's eerie, oscillating farfisa organ created a sense of cosmic drift. Mason's patient, malleted tom-toms provided a ritualistic heartbeat, and Waters' bass line throbbed with a sinister, metronomic persistence. Over this simmering cauldron of sound, Waters would mutter his cryptic, chilling lyrics, his voice barely a whisper, creating an atmosphere of profound dread and mystery. It was the sound of a band learning to wield silence and space as instruments in their own right. Yet the defining moment of the performance, the sequence that most perfectly encapsulated their live dynamic in this transitional period, was the classic pairing of Green is the Color, flowing directly and brutally into Careful with That Axe, Eugene. This was the essence of Pink Floyd in 1970, a perfectly executed piece of musical theater that showcased their mastery of dynamics and psychological manipulation. First, the deceptive calm. Green is the color. A gentle, almost fragile pastoral folk song from the Moore soundtrack. Gilmore's voice, soft and yearning, would paint an idyllic picture of an English countryside, a reverie of sunlit days and easygoing love. It was a moment of disarming beauty, a folk lullaby designed to soothe the audience, to lull them into a state of comfortable tranquility. The tourists and socialites might have smiled, recognizing something approachable, something nice. And then, just as the audience was settled, the trap was sprung. Without warning, the pastoral dream would curdle into a waking nightmare. The music would shift, almost imperceptibly at first, into the tense one-chord vamp of "Careful with that axe, Eugene." The dynamic range would plummet to a whisper. Wright's organ would begin to shimmer with a new menacing quality. Gilmore's guitar would offer jagged, nervous replies slicing through the quiet. And Roger Waters would stalk the stage, his bass line a predatory, single-note heartbeat, his presence growing more and more menacing. The tension was palpable, an almost physical thing that hung in the humid night air. It would build, and build and build, stretching the audience's nerves to their breaking point until, at its absolute unbearable peak, Waters would step to the microphone and unleash his now legendary primal scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated pre-verbal terror that would rip through the tranquil night air, shattering the composure of the evening. This was not entertainment, this was a psychological assault. It was the band taking the placid, beautiful, and fundamentally superficial atmosphere of Saint-Tropez and deliberately, methodically violating it. It was an act of artistic aggression. One can only imagine the tableau of faces in the crowd, the small contingent of devoted fans, fists clenched in cathartic exhilaration, the confused and startled socialites, perhaps literally dropping their champagne flutes, the local townspeople, wondering what manner of strange, violent English madness had been allowed to descend upon their shores. To complete the picture of this profound cultural dislocation, fragmented television footage that survives from the event reportedly shows the band during soundcheck in their swimming trunks, Roger Waters casually eating a peach, looking less like impending rock deities and more like pale British tourists who had stumbled upon a stage and some musical equipment. It is a perfect, candid image of their state of being, men out of time and out of place, about to create a sound that was anything but casual. So why, after all is said and done, does this one specific performance, on a small stage in a town devoted to decadent leisure, matter so profoundly in the grand narrative of Pink Floyd? Because it was here, and in countless other unheralded shows just like it across the continent, that the Pink Floyd of legend was truly born. This was not a victory lap. It was the laboratory. It was here, in front of a largely indifferent or bewildered audience, that they workshopped the sprawling, long-form compositional ideas that would lead directly to the glorious, sidelong epic echoes on their next album, Metal. Without the grueling live experimentation on Atom Heart Mother throughout 1970, the focused masterpiece of echoes would have been inconceivable. The band was testing the limits of their audience, yes, but more importantly, they were testing the limits of themselves, pushing the boundaries of what a four-piece rock band could be expected to do on a stage. They flatly refused to pander. They could have played a set of blues jams or rehashed their catchier psychedelic-era singles. Instead, they offered the amazing pudding. They offered a 25-minute quasi-symphony, a 10-minute descent into a blood-curdling scream, and a hypnotic journey to the heart of the sun. This unwavering commitment to their own difficult, challenging, and uncompromising vision, especially in the face of an audience and a setting that could not have been more antithetical to it, is the very core of the Pink Floyd story. Their later, almost unimaginable success was not built on simplifying their ideas for the mainstream. It was built on the audacious act of forcing the mainstream to come to them, on their own deeply idiosyncratic terms. The concert in Saint-Tropez was a quiet, almost defiant declaration of intent. It was a powerful statement that they would follow their own strange and often melancholic muse, whether it led them to a stadium filled with cheering acolytes or to a confused beach on the French Riviera. They were not there to be part of the party. They were there to build a brutalist sonic edifice, a cathedral of sound, even if they had to construct it in the middle of a carnival. The recordings that survive from this era, both audio bootlegs and the fragmented French television footage, capture this quality perfectly. It is not the slick, polished, and sometimes sterile machine of the later stadium tours. It is something more volatile, more dangerous, and in many ways more thrilling. It is the sound of four men, alone with their immense and difficult ideas, wrestling them into submission under a starry Mediterranean sky. This, then, is the kind of history that truly motivates. It serves as a vital reminder that artistic greatness is not a sudden arrival, not a gift from the gods. It is a slow, arduous, and often painful process of trial and error, of bold experiments and spectacular failures, of holding fast to a singular vision even when, and especially when, the world around you seems to demand something simpler, safer, and more palatable. The story of Pink Floyd in Saint-Tropez is not about a legendary concert that everyone should know by heart. It is about a moment of profound artistic courage and integrity. It is a powerful call to look past the obvious, sanitized narratives of rock history, to seek out those strange, incongruous, and uncomfortable moments where the real, essential work gets done. It is in the grit, not the gloss, that the true character of any great artist is ultimately revealed. And on that warm August night in 1970, amidst the suntanned and the beautiful, the essential character of Pink Floyd was being forged in a fire of their own magnificent, uncompromising, and gloriously difficult design. Have you ever wondered what a revolution sounds like at its inception? Not the polished, packaged products sold back to the masses, but the raw, chaotic, and dangerously uncertain sound of creation itself. Forget the stadium pyrotechnics, the inflatable pigs, the monolithic concept albums, and the inter-band psychodrama that would later define their legend and line their pockets. Travel back to a sterile, unforgivingly lit television studio in San Francisco on April 30th, 1970. Here, for the local public broadcasting station KQED, Pink Floyd, a band still reeling from the psychological amputation of its brilliant fractured founder and desperately searching for a new voice, plugged in and laid bare the beautiful, sprawling mess of their own becoming. This wasn't a concert, it was a public exorcism, a sonic vivisection broadcast in living color. It was a snapshot of four men grappling with a ghost, navigating the treacherous waters of their own ambition, and stumbling with breathtaking audacity toward a future they couldn't possibly have imagined. To grasp the monumental importance of that hour-long broadcast, one must first immerse oneself in the specific, acrid atmosphere of 1970. The utopian dream of the 60s had curdled. The Beatles, the very sun around which the pop universe had revolved, had officially dissolved just weeks earlier, leaving a power vacuum of immense proportions. The hippie ideal had been brutally trampled in the mud of Woodstock, commercialized into parody, and finally stabbed to death at the Altamont Speedway Free Festival. The air was thick with paranoia and disillusionment. Into this landscape of broken promises and shifting paradigms, a new kind of rock music was emerging, one that eschewed the 3-minute pop single in favor of long-form composition, instrumental virtuosity, and lyrical themes that delved into mythology, science fiction, and social commentary. It was dubbed progressive rock, and bands like King Crimson, Yes, and Genesis were its new standard-bearers. And where was Pink Floyd in this new world order? They were outliers, pioneers who had inadvertently helped lay the groundwork for this movement, but now found themselves in a creative no-man's land. They were a band adrift, haunted by the incandescent self-immolation of their original leader, Syd Barrett. Syd was the diamond, the madcap genius whose acid-drenched nursery rhymes and unpredictable avant-garde guitar work had defined their genesis. But by 1968, the diamond had shattered. His prodigious LSD consumption had pushed his already fragile psyche past the point of no return, rendering him a beautiful, vacant shell, incapable of functioning, let alone leading a band. The decision to oust him was not a malicious coup, but an act of brutal pragmatism, a choice between the band's survival and its founder's spiraling descent into madness. It was a wound that would never fully heal, a source of profound guilt and creative impetus that would fuel Roger Waters' most enduring lyrical obsessions for decades to come. Into this void stepped David Gilmour, a childhood friend of Barrett's from Cambridge. Gilmour was everything Barrett was not: grounded, reliable, and technically proficient, with a lyrical, blues-inflected guitar style and a voice as smooth as polished riverstone. His arrival wasn't a simple replacement. It was a fundamental alteration of the band's DNA. The Pink Floyd that entered the KQED studios was a four-headed beast, learning to walk again. It was a tense, often unspoken negotiation between four distinct personalities: Roger Waters, the band's intellectual anchor, his burgeoning conceptual ambition and cynical worldview beginning to assert itself; Richard Wright, the quiet, classically trained keyboardist, the true architect of the band's atmospheric soundscapes; Nick Mason, the unflappable, jazz-inflected drummer, providing a fluid architectural foundation; and Gilmour, the new blood, tasked with the impossible job of honoring the past while forging a new path forward. The setlist for the broadcast, titled An Hour with Pink Floyd, is a testament to this transitional state. It was a raw, unfiltered document of their live show at the time, a mix of atmospheric film soundtrack pieces, pastoral folk meditations, and long-form instrumental explorations that defied easy categorization. They opened with the colossal epic, then known by its working title, The Amazing Pudding, which would soon be officially christened Atom Heart Mother. On the album released later that year, the piece would be a grand, if somewhat unwieldy affair, augmented by a full brass section and choir arranged by the avant-garde composer Ron Geeson. Here, in the KQED studio, stripped of its orchestral bombast, the composition is revealed in its purest form, a pure, unadulterated showcase of the band's improvisational telepathy. It begins with Gilmour's slide guitar, a mournful, keening cry that hangs in the air like a desert mirage. The band enters with a stately, almost funereal pace, establishing a theme that is both majestic and melancholic. This is not rock and roll as rebellion. This is rock and roll as architecture, the slow, deliberate construction of a sonic cathedral. Wright's Farfisa and Hammond organs are the key, laying down ethereal, ghostly textures that create a vast, empty canvas for Gilmour's guitar to explore. His playing throughout the broadcast is a revelation. The searing, perfectly structured, and emotionally resonant solos that would become his trademark are not yet fully formed. Instead, we hear a guitarist thinking aloud, his lines searching, questioning, and occasionally exploding into moments of pure, blues-drenched catharsis. He is still finding his voice within the band, and that process of discovery is utterly captivating. The middle section, later dubbed Funky Dung, sees the band lock into a surprisingly slinky blues-based groove, a reminder that beneath the cosmic explorations lay a solid foundation of rhythm and blues. Stripped bare, Atom Heart Mother is revealed not as a pretentious folly, but as a bold, audacious experiment in long-form composition, a testament to their collective confidence and burgeoning musical ambition. The sterile, audience-free environment of the television studio, with its harsh lighting and unforgiving multi-camera setup, becomes an unwitting participant in the drama. There is no room for rock star posturing, no adoring crowd to feed off. The four musicians are utterly absorbed in their craft, their focus absolute. The camera work is intimate, almost invasive, lingering on their hands, their faces, the subtle, nonverbal cues that pass between them. We see the sweat and concentration, the sheer physical and emotional effort that went into creating these soundscapes. This is most evident during the performance of Careful with That Axe, Eugene, a piece that had been a cornerstone of their live set for years, and a masterclass in tension and release. It begins in near silence, a slow, menacing build-up driven by Waters' simple, hypnotic one-note bass line, and Wright's shimmering, ominous organ swells. Mason's drumming is a study in restraint, his gentle cymbal taps and mallet-driven tom-toms adding to the creeping sense of dread. Gilmour contributes delicate, whispered guitar phrases that seem to hang in the air, like dust motes in a sunbeam. The tension builds to an almost unbearable point, a sonic representation of a descent into madness. Then, it happens. Roger Waters, his face contorted, unleashes his now legendary, blood-curdling scream, a moment of pure, primal release that is both terrifying and exhilarating. It is the sound of the id unleashed, a cathartic explosion that shatters the carefully constructed tension. The band erupts into a chaotic, freeform jam, a sonic maelstrom that mirrors the psychological fragmentation the piece so brilliantly evokes. In the context of the band's history, that scream feels like more than just a theatrical device. It is the collective howl of a band still processing the trauma of losing its founder, a raw, unfiltered expression of pain and confusion. Yet the broadcast is not all darkness and chaos. The set features quieter, more reflective moments that highlight the band's surprising versatility and deep-seated Englishness. Grantchester Meadows, a gentle pastoral folk song penned by Waters, is performed acoustically by Waters and Gilmore. It is a nostalgic ode to their shared childhood home of Cambridge, its idyllic imagery of lazy afternoons by the river, a stark contrast to the cosmic explorations that bookend it. The performance is enhanced by pre-recorded sound effects of birdsong and buzzing flies, an early and effective use of musique concrète that would become a hallmark of their later work. This performance in particular is often cited by aficionados as superior to the studio version on the sprawling, uneven double album Ummagumma. Gilmore's delicate harmonies add a layer of warmth and depth, and the intimate setting lends the song an air of genuine, heartfelt nostalgia. It reveals a crucial aspect of the Pink Floyd psyche, the constant tension between the vast, impersonal cosmos and the deeply personal, almost sentimental longing for a lost English innocence. This pastoral mood continues with Green is the Color, another gentle, folk-tinged piece from their soundtrack to the film More. Sung by Gilmore, it serves as a beautiful, lyrical prelude to the sonic apocalypse of A Saucer Full of Secrets. This juxtaposition is key to understanding their art. They were masters of dynamics, not just in terms of volume, but in terms of emotion. They could lull you into a state of pastoral bliss before plunging you into the heart of a supernova. A Saucer Full of Secrets, a multi-part instrumental suite that had been a live staple for years, is a perfect microcosm of their creative process. It is a journey through chaos, a study in controlled entropy. The piece moves through distinct movements: the frantic, percussive chaos of the opening, the menacing, militaristic drum patterns of Storm Signal, and finally, the glorious organ-led resolution of Celestial Voices. It is the sound of conflict and resolution, of a band wrestling with dissonance and emerging into a state of grace. Wright's performance here is nothing short of magnificent. His funereal organ chords at the piece's climax are a premonition of the grand, elegiac sound that would define The Great Gig in the Sky and Us and Them. The inclusion of Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun provides the most direct link to their psychedelic past. It is a track unique in their discography, as it is the only studio recording widely believed to contain contributions from all 5 members, though the exact nature of Gilmore's guitar part, played alongside Barrett's, remains a topic of debate among aficionados. Penned by Waters, its hypnotic 2-chord structure, esoteric lyrics, and Mason's malleted ritualistic drumming are a clear holdover from the Barrett era. Yet, in the hands of the 1970 lineup, the song is transformed. It becomes a vehicle for extended trance-like improvisation, a dark, ritualistic jam that showcases Wright's masterful use of keyboard textures to create a sense of vast, interstellar space. It is the sound of the old Floyd being reinterpreted and assimilated by the new Floyd, a respectful nod to their origins before they blasted off into a new orbit. What the KQED performance ultimately captures, with an honesty that is both unflinching and deeply moving, is the sound of a band forging a new identity in real time. This was a period of intense, almost desperate experimentation. They were consciously moving away from the song-based psychedelia of their early years and toward the long-form, conceptually unified pieces that would come to define them. Their creative process, as they often described in interviews from the period, was one of communal exploration. They would enter the studio with nothing prepared, jamming for hours on end, sifting through the chaos in search of happy accidents and moments of inspiration. The sprawling improvisational nature of the KQED set is a direct reflection of this process. It's not always perfect. There are moments where the jams meander, where the energy dips, but that is precisely what makes it so compelling. It is the sound of risk, of four musicians pushing themselves and their audience into uncharted territory, without a map or a safety net. This performance stands as a crucial document, a Rosetta Stone for understanding the transition between the Syd Barrett-led psychedelic pop group and the global phenomenon that would create the Dark Side of the Moon just 3 years later. It reveals a band that was, in many ways, more democratic and collaborative than they would ever be again. Waters' conceptual tyranny had not yet fully asserted itself, and the music feels like a genuine conversation between four distinct, equally important musical voices. It is a raw, honest, and deeply human performance, a glimpse of a legendary band not as rock gods, but as working musicians covered in sweat, searching for a sound, a direction, and a future. For 1 hour, under the hot, unforgiving lights of a San Francisco television studio, they found it. They captured lightning in a bottle, creating a piece of art that was both a requiem for their lost leader and a defiant statement of their own rebirth. Thankfully, the tapes were rolling. In the grand, often tumultuous and frequently mythologized narrative of rock and roll, there exist certain moments that transcend mere performance. They become something akin to sacred texts, instances where time, place, and artistry converge with such force that they carve a permanent sigil into the cultural consciousness. The Beatles on the Apple Corps rooftop, a final defiant blast of pure pop genius against the London skyline. Jimi Hendrix at Monterey, a fiery sacrificial baptism that redefined the electric guitar. Bob Dylan at Newport, an act of electric apostasy that drew a line in the sand between folk purity and rock's untamed future. These are the markers, the seismic shifts in the landscape. And then there is Pink Floyd, standing not before a screaming throng, but in the spectral, sun-scorched silence of a dead Roman city. To speak of Pink Floyd's performance in the ancient amphitheater of Pompeii in October of 1971 is to speak of an event that stands utterly alone, an audacious, hauntingly beautiful, and frankly, almost unbelievable statement that continues to ripple through the very fabric of music and film. It was a happening born not of a grand, meticulously crafted design, but of a filmmaker's misplaced passport, a band's search for its soul, and the kind of serendipity that feels like fate. It was, in essence, a glorious, world-altering accident. To truly excavate the meaning and significance of Pink Floyd, Live at Pompeii, one must first drill down into the volatile and creatively fertile ground from which it sprang. The early 1970s were a period of immense cultural and social whiplash. The lysergic utopian dreams of the 1960s had curdled into a harsh, gray dawn. The come-down was brutal. The optimistic promises of peace and love had soured, leaving a generation grappling with the protracted agony of the Vietnam War, the burgeoning cynicism of Watergate-era politics, and a profound sense of disillusionment. In the realm of popular music, this societal shift manifested in a decisive move away from the concise, 3-minute radio-friendly pop single of the past towards more ambitious, complex, and often ponderous forms. This was the undisputed dawn of progressive rock, a genre that, for all its later derided excesses, represented a vital and fearless artistic movement. It was a genre that embraced labyrinthine compositions, virtuosic instrumentalism, and weighty thematic concerns, drawing as much from the hallowed halls of classical music and the smoky clubs of jazz as from the foundational bedrock of the blues. Bands like King Crimson, with their jagged, terrifyingly complex arrangements, Genesis with their theatrical, pastoral fantasies, and Yes, with their quasi-mystical, intricate soundscapes, were fundamentally redrawing the map of what rock music could be. They demanded more from their listeners than a tapping foot and a catchy chorus. They demanded engagement, concentration, and an open mind. Pink Floyd, at this precise juncture, was a band adrift in a sea of its own making, a creative entity in a profound state of transition. The brilliant, erratic star of their founder, the visionary Syd Barrett, had collapsed into a black hole of acid-fueled psychosis. His genius, which had defined their whimsical, paisley-patterned early sound, had become a casualty of his own explorations, and his departure in 1968 left a creative vacuum of staggering proportions. The remaining members, Roger Waters on bass and vocals, David Gilmour on guitar and vocals, Richard Wright on keyboards, and Nick Mason on drums, were left to navigate the wreckage. They were a quartet of immense yet disparate talents, struggling to forge a new identity. The albums that immediately followed Barrett's exit, while containing undeniable moments of brilliance, were often sprawling, unfocused affairs. They were the sound of a band searching, sometimes desperately, for a cohesive voice. The pastoral orchestral sweep of Adam Hartmother 1970 and the schizophrenic bifurcated studio and live experiment of Umaguma 1969 showcased their boundless ambition, but also their lack of a unified direction. They were a band with the technical prowess and the sonic imagination to create entire worlds, but they lacked a clear, guiding philosophy. That vital coalescence began to truly happen with their 1971 album, Metal. It was on this record, and specifically on the epic sidelong masterpiece, Echoes, that the definitive Pink Floyd sound finally crystallized. Here they found the perfect, symbiotic synthesis of Gilmour's soaring lyrical guitar lines, Wright's ethereal atmospheric keyboard textures, Mason's dynamic, nuanced drumming, and Waters' burgeoning obsession with grand, unifying lyrical and thematic concepts. It was a sound that was at once vast and intimate, cosmic and deeply, achingly human. It was the sound of four distinct musical personalities finally learning to breathe as one. Metal was the launch pad, the final systems check before the stratospheric journey that would be the dark side of the moon. Live at Pompeii would serve as the public, visual confirmation of this newfound power. It was against this backdrop of creative rebirth that a young, ambitious Scottish filmmaker named Adrian Mabin entered their orbit. Mabin, a man of refined artistic sensibilities, was fascinated by the intersection of music and the visual arts. His initial pitch to the band's manager, Steve O'Rourke, was a rather conventional, if high-minded one. A film that would juxtapose Pink Floyd's music with the surrealist art of painters like René Magritte and Giorgio de Chirico, exploring the subconscious links between sound and image. The band, weary of the endless procession of filmmakers wanting to capture their psychedelic essence, was politely but firmly uninterested. The idea, it seemed, was dead on arrival. It lay dormant until a fateful trip to Italy, a journey that would change the course of Mabin's career and the band's legacy forever. During his travels, Mabin discovered he had lost his passport, forcing him to retrace his steps to the Bay of Naples. It was on this unplanned detour that he found himself, at dusk, wandering through the deserted, spectral ruins of the ancient Roman amphitheater of Pompeii. In the eerie, profound silence of the deserted arena, with the brooding, ominous specter of Mount Vesuvius looming in the distance, Mabin had his eureka moment. This was the place, not as a passive backdrop for a conventional concert film, but as an active, silent participant in the performance itself. He envisioned an anti-Woodstock, a deliberate and stark rejection of the peace and love festival ethos. There would be no sprawling, muddy audience, no countercultural spectacle. The only spectators would be the ghosts of the city's past, the silent stone witnesses to a catastrophe that had frozen a civilization in time nearly 2 millennia earlier. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the idea cannot be overstated. To take one of the world's most iconic and sacrosanct archaeological sites, a city petrified by a cataclysmic volcanic eruption in 79 AD, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and to use its heart as a stage for a modern, amplified rock band, was a move that bordered on the sacrilegious. Pompeii was not just a collection of ruins. It was a sprawling, open-air tomb, a place of profound historical significance and a sobering testament to the terrifying fragility of human existence in the face of nature's wrath. To introduce the decibels, the feedback, and the electronic pulse of a 1970s rock band into this hallowed space was a monumental gamble, one that could have easily collapsed into a display of monumental, hubristic arrogance. Yet it was precisely this inherent, jarring tension between the ancient and the modern The organic stone and the electric wire, the deafening silence of history and the piercing wail of a distorted guitar, that would ultimately make Live at Pompeii such a singular and compelling work of art. In a strange way, the band was simply reactivating the venue's original purpose. The amphitheater, a marvel of Roman acoustic engineering, was designed to amplify and project sound to create an immersive, overwhelming experience for its audience. Pink Floyd, with their arsenal of amplifiers and speakers, was simply tapping into that ancient design, albeit with a sonic palette that the Romans could never have possibly imagined. The band, who had initially dismissed Mabon, was won over by the sheer magnificent lunacy of the concept. This was not another film about the scene. This was something elemental, something stark and powerful. And so, in early October 1971, Pink Floyd and a small dedicated film crew descended upon Pompeii, armed with their full touring rig and a 24-track mobile recording unit that had to be painstakingly transported from Paris. The logistical challenges were, to put it mildly, daunting. A massive 3-kilometer-long cable had to be run from the modern town of Pompeii's City Hall to provide power to the site. The band's extensive equipment, the stacks of Hewatt amplifiers, the Binson EchoRec delay units, the massive PA system, Nick Mason's gleaming Ludwig drum kit, Rick Wright's array of Hammond and Farfisa organs, had to be painstakingly hand-carried and wheeled through the ancient uneven stone streets and into the heart of the amphitheater. For 4 days, from the 4th to the 7th of October, the band and crew worked under grueling conditions, battling the intense, baking heat of the southern Italian day and the biting, penetrating cold of the desert night, all to capture the performances that would form the spine of the film. The set list chosen for the Pompeii performance was, in itself, a perfect snapshot of a band at a pivotal crossroads, a bridge between their space rock, improvisational past, and the thematic, architectural grandeur that would define their future. They opened the proceedings with the thunderous, driving instrumental, One of These Days, the opening track from Metal. It was a statement of intent, a track that immediately established the film's raw, visceral, and almost violent energy. The sight of Roger Waters and David Gilmour, two dueling basses in hand, their slight figures dwarfed by the massive curved stone structure behind them, is an image that has become indelibly etched into the iconography of rock music. The track's single distorted vocal line delivered by Nick Mason, "One of these days I'm going to cut you into little pieces," takes on a particularly menacing quality in the desolate, sun-bleached arena. It's less a rock concert and more an ominous pagan ritual. They followed this with A Saucerful of Secrets, a sprawling multi-part instrumental from their second album that served as a direct link to their post-Barrett experimental phase. In Pompeii, the piece becomes a journey into pure sound and texture. It is a showcase for their improvisational prowess and their collective willingness to explore the outer, often cacophonous, reaches of sonic experimentation. The segment titled Syncopated Pandemonium is exactly that, a maelstrom of crashing cymbals, distorted organ stabs, and screaming guitar feedback that feels like the sonic equivalent of the volcanic eruption that destroyed the very city they were standing in. It then resolves into the final hymn-like section, Celestial Voices, with Wright's funereal organ and Gilmour's wordless angelic vocal creating a mood of profound post-apocalyptic peace. It is a moment of sublime beauty emerging from chaos. The film also featured a searing, definitive rendition of Careful with That Axe, Eugene, a track that had been a staple of their live shows for years. It is a slow-burning instrumental that perfectly encapsulates the band's mastery of dynamics. It begins with a quiet, menacing bass line from Waters and Wright's subtle jazzy keyboard phrases, creating a palpable sense of unease. The tension builds incrementally, relentlessly, until it finally erupts in a terrifying crescendo, punctuated by Waters' now legendary blood-curdling primal scream. In the context of the empty amphitheater, the scream echoes with an unnerving, ghostly quality, as if he is channeling the terror of the city's original inhabitants. It's a moment of pure, uninhibited catharsis, both terrifying and exhilarating. But it was the monumental performance of echoes that formed the undisputed heart and soul of the film. This 23-minute epic, which occupied the entire second side of Metal, was the ultimate showcase for the band's newfound maturity, cohesion, and compositional genius. The performance in Pompeii is, without exaggeration, mesmerizing. It is divided into two parts for the film, bookending the other performances. Gilmour's guitar weeps, soars, and sings, his iconic solos echoing through the ancient amphitheater with a haunting, otherworldly beauty that seems to hang in the hot, still air. Richard Wright's keyboard work is the atmospheric glue, creating a rich, immersive tapestry of sound that ranges from the elegiac grandeur of the Hammond organ to the strange, whale song-like effects he coaxes from his VCS-3 synthesizer. Nick Mason's drumming is a masterclass in dynamic control, shifting effortlessly from delicate, subtle rhythms to powerful, explosive fills. And at the very center of it all is Roger Waters' simple, yet profoundly effective, two-note bass line, the hypnotic, sonar-like pulse that acts as the anchor for the entire sprawling composition. The performance footage is masterfully intercut with slow, lingering shots of the band wandering, like lost tourists, through the desolate, ash-covered streets and villas of Pompeii, creating a powerful and poignant visual metaphor for the song's central themes of communication, connection, and isolation. When Gilmour and Wright harmonize on the lyrics, "Strangers passing in the street, by chance two separate glances meet, and I am you and what I see is me," the words resonate with an almost unbearable poignancy, a dialogue across millennia between the living artists and the long-dead inhabitants of the ruins. The filming process in Pompeii was, by all accounts, an arduous and often frustrating affair. The crew had to contend with the fickle, unpredictable weather, the logistical nightmare of powering a full-scale rock concert in the middle of a protected archaeological site, and the constant nagging technical glitches caused by faulty power supplies. Yet these very challenges and limitations only seemed to distill and intensify the performance. Stripped of the crutch of a live audience, denied the feedback loop of applause and adoration, the band was forced to turn inward, to focus with an almost telepathic intensity on the music itself, on the intricate, unspoken dialogue between the four members. The result is a performance that is both incredibly precise and wonderfully loose, a testament to the thousands of hours they had spent playing together in clubs, halls, and studios. It is the sound of a band in perfect isolated communion with its own art. Following the initial, sun-drenched shoot in Pompeii, it became clear to Mabon that he needed more footage to complete his film. Additional material was filmed in a darkened Paris studio at the Europa Sonar facility in December of 1971. It was here that they recorded a hypnotic, trance-like rendition of "Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun," a Waters-penned track from A Saucerful of Secrets that, with its gong and eerie, modal structure, always felt like a journey into the mystic East. When intercut with close-ups of the band's impassive faces, solarized footage of the Pompeii ruins, and shots of bubbling volcanic mud pits near Vesuvius, the performance takes on an almost ritualistic, ceremonial quality. It was also in Paris that they filmed the wonderfully whimsical and charmingly absurd Mademoiselle Nobs, a straightforward 12-bar blues featuring David Gilmour on harmonica and acoustic guitar, Roger Waters on another acoustic, and a howling, mournful Afghan hound named Nobs, owned by Madonna Buglione, the daughter of a circus director, providing the lead vocals. It's a moment of pure, unpretentious levity in an otherwise intensely serious and atmospheric film, a crucial reminder that for all their cosmic explorations and philosophical ponderings, Pink Floyd was still a band with a deep-seated English sense of humor and absurdity. The original 60-minute version of Pink Floyd, live at Pompeii, premiered at the Edinburgh Film Festival in September 1972, where it was met with a mixture of confusion and acclaim. It was a film that defied easy categorization. It wasn't a conventional concert film, nor was it a straightforward documentary. It existed in its own unique, unclassifiable space. In 1974, Mabon, seeking to capitalize on the band's skyrocketing fame post-Dark Side of the Moon, re-released the film in an expanded version. This new director's cut included documentary footage of the band at work in Abbey Road Studios during the recording sessions for what would become one of the best-selling and most culturally significant albums of all time. These studio segments, capturing the band members eating greasy spoon meals, discussing football, and meticulously crafting the soundscapes of On the Run, Us and Them, and Brain Damage, served a dual purpose. On one hand, they served to demystify the band, to peel back the curtain of their increasingly monolithic public image and reveal the ordinary, often mundane, human beings behind the music. On the other hand, these glimpses into their painstaking creative process, the endless experimentation with synthesizers, the layering of vocal harmonies, the search for the perfect sound effect, only added to their mystique. It provided a fascinating and essential counterpoint to the mythic elemental performance in Pompeii, grounding the film in the stark reality of the recording studio while simultaneously highlighting the alchemical process by which their masterpieces were forged. So what is it about Live at Pompeii that grants it such an enduring, almost mystical power? Why does it continue to fascinate and inspire us more than half a century after it was created? The answer is as multi-layered as the band's music itself. It is, of course, about the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the concept, the magnificent, surrealist collision of ancient history and futuristic art. It is about the raw, untamed power of the performance, the sound of a world-class band at the absolute zenith of its instrumental powers, stripped of all artifice and distraction. But more than that, it is about the film's haunting, elegiac tone, its profound and unspoken meditation on time, memory, mortality, and the enduring power of human creation. It establishes a dialogue across the chasm of time, between the living and the dead, the ephemeral and the eternal. In the final analysis, Live at Pompeii is so much more than just a concert film. It is a singular work of art that effortlessly transcends its genre. The absence of an audience, initially a logistical necessity, became its greatest artistic strength. It transformed the event from a performance into a communion, a pure, unmediated confrontation between the band and the very essence of their music, with the silent, ghostly amphitheater acting as the sole judge and resonator. It is a film that invites us, demands us to listen not just with our ears, but with our entire beings, to feel the immense, crushing weight of history in every reverberating note, to sense the ghosts of Pompeii stirring in the pregnant silence between the songs. In doing so, it offers us something truly rare and precious, a moment of pure, unadulterated artistic creation, captured in amber, that will continue to resonate for as long as there are people who seek to find meaning, beauty, and truth in the elemental marriage of sound and silence. It remains a stark, beautiful, and uncompromising challenge, a gauntlet thrown down to all future generations of artists. It says with quiet, monumental confidence, "This is what we did. We stood in the ruins of a dead empire, and we made a noise that echoed through time. Now, what will you do?" And in that silent, resonant challenge lies its most profound and everlasting legacy.